Okay, I think we have everyone in now that was in the waiting room. So welcome everyone to this month's peopleHUB webinar. Thanks for you for attending and signing up to join us today. Oh, sorry, 1 minute, got one more person to add. So we set up the peopleHUB community to create a platform for like-minded individuals that work within one HR, manage people and have different business owners. This month we are focusing on the return to work from both a HR and a health and safety side of things. So to ensure everything runs smoothly, we have everyone on mute at the start of the meeting. We have a list of pre-prepared questions that we're going to run through, but we'd encourage anyone who does have a question to pop it in the chat, and I'll ensure that we read it out at the end and that it's addressed by either Lauren or Colin. So on this session today, we have Lauren from our HR team, and we also have Colin Jones, who's a new addition to the team at High Performance, and he's joined us as a health and safety consultant. So he is going to be covering all of the health and safety updates and services that we provided, or that we provide. So we're going to kick things off by going through the return to work on the HR side of things. So I've got a few questions I'm going to ask of Lauren, and she's going to kind of give us some feedback on these and give us some advice and guidance. So the first question that we have is about what steps should a business owner or director be following for managing the return to the office now that we are starting to come out of the lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that every business needs to do, as you know, as you're all aware, is to just make sure that your workplace is COVID secure. So making sure that you've carried out the risk assessments and that you've prepared the place of work to be able to accommodate the people returning. Colin will obviously go through that in more detail about how you can make sure that your work is COVID secure. But obviously that's the first and foremost in terms of priority, because it's, you know, you can't be asking people to come back without having that guarantee for them. Secondly, I'd make sure that you are communicating properly with staff. So ensure that people are aware about when they should be returning to work and what that will look like. You know, I think it's easy for us, those of us who are keen to get back into the office, to potentially forget that people have been at home maybe for a year, returning to the office may be a little bit daunting for them. So it's just really important that you communicate with them, make sure that they know that they are returning to somewhere that's COVID secure, what that will look like, and any support that you'll be offering with their return. Also, I would make sure that you are letting staff know when you do announce that you're returning to work, that they can come to you for support or ask you any queries. You know, I think for you to just say, right, we're returning on the 12th of April and see you at 9 o'clock, I think that could potentially unnerve a few staff members. So maybe just make sure that you're sending out a really positive communication, thanking people for cooperating with you over the past year and for working hard from home. Don't do a Boris Johnson and dismiss everybody who did work from home as having too many days off. Just make sure that everybody's sort of prepared and positive to come back to work so that it runs as smooth as possible.
Okay, excellent. So I suppose that leads into the next question, is what do we do with an employee that doesn't want to return to the office or refuses to return to work?
Okay, so this is something that is popping up quite a lot recently. I've been advising quite a number of clients who have got the odd person who has said, you know, actually, I'm not ready to come back to work. I think pre this month, I guess, you know, an employee would have a fairly good argument because the message was still to stay at home and work from home if possible. However, moving forward, I think we've listened to the guidance, and the government are now encouraging people to get back to the office. So technically, people should be able to start coming back. I would, however, make sure that you deal with each person's, you know, refusal to return to work on a case-by-case basis, because there's a few things that you would need to consider. The first step I'd take is to maybe arrange a meeting with that employee and try to allay their fears. Like I said before, you know, people have had a year off work or out of the office. They may find that difficult to come back. I think particularly if any of your staff have been on furlough, it would be, you know, even more harder for them to return. So I think it's really important that you communicate with those employees and try and allay any fears that they do have, because it could just be that they are a little bit apprehensive. If it's a situation where an employee has decided that actually for their mental health or for any other reasons, could be care, the care situation in their home life could have changed. They may now care for some dependents that they didn't have pre-COVID. If there's a situation that arises like that, then I would just suggest that you follow the formal flexible working request for that. So you would make that employee submit a formal flexible working request, and then you'd go through the formal procedure, which you are legally obliged to do anyway, and to consider their requests and see how that'll work. If you do just get the odd rogue employee who has decided that actually they just don't want to come back to the office whatsoever, it's not for them, and you think that actually will either on a part-time basis or full-time, we do need you in the office or wherever the workplace is, then ultimately, once you've sort of exhausted all those avenues, like allaying the fears, considering whether it's appropriate for them to submit a flexible working request, ultimately it would just stand as a refusal to return to work, which is a failure to follow a basic management instruction and could be dealt with under the disciplinary procedure. However, I think the best approach in the first instance is to try and keep that communication fluid between you and that employee, and just try to encourage them to come back rather than go down that route. But obviously, if you do get those employees who are just being a bit difficult, you do have that to rely on, I guess.
Okay. So one of the questions we've been asked is, what approach are other organisations taking to flexible working?
Yeah, I mean, I think I speak for probably the majority of the organisations that we certainly deal with, in that coming back to the workplace, particularly the office full time, is potentially a thing of the past. So we have many organisations, obviously other than those that where flexible working just isn't feasible for example, if they work on a construction site or they work in a dental practice or something. I think the majority of people are taking the approach that working from home is now going to be considered a bit of the norm. Most of those organisations have decided to take a hybrid approach where they are having some days working from home and some in the office. I think the key thing that they have done there, though, is made sure that employees are very aware of the performance parameters and they understand what's expected of them each week. So, with a focus on output rather than hours. I think most organisations, if they feel that they can manage that performance and they can, measure the output of that employee, they're sort of focusing less on the presenteeism within the office. So I think as long as you've got that that process really clear and that you trust your employees to work from home, which I guess if you don't trust them, then maybe they shouldn't be your employees and you maybe need to deal with some other issues. So yeah, I'd say the majority of people are going for the hybrid approach. We do have a couple of clients who have actually told us that they're completely given up the lease on the buildings that they rent and they're having permanent home working. But those clients did all run a bit of a survey with their staff before doing that, because I think that's another thing to consider. Home working, I think at the start of the pandemic was a bit of a novelty to a lot of people. They enjoyed the flexibility it gave them. But a lot of people have now decided that they actually miss that human interaction, the social side of being in work, and the separation, I suppose, from your home and the workplace. So I think if you were going to go down that approach of completely moving to home working, firstly, I'd maybe put it out there to your staff and see what the feedback is before you do that. And secondly, if the majority of people do say that they are going to home work and they're happy to do that permanently, you would either need to gain their formal consent or you'd need to consult with them to change their terms and conditions of the contract, because it's likely that most of their contracts of employment that you have for your staff will say that the place of work is an office. So yeah, just a couple of things to bear in mind if you do decide to take any of those approaches.
Okay, perfect. One of the questions that we had through is with regards to the vaccines. So what we've seen in a few cases now is that people are feeling a bit unwell or are a bit drained or tired or whatever it may be the next day and are calling in sick or unable to work. If an employee is calling in sick after having taken the vaccine, how would this be classified in terms of sickness, or how would you record or manage this?
Technically speaking, it would just be considered as any other sickness absence because the employee is not well enough to come to work. However, we obviously don't want to deter people from getting the vaccine, and we also don't want to be seen to be penalising people for getting the vaccine. So I think to manage that in the same way you would any other sickness absence could potentially cause some difficulties. So what I would do is maybe recommend that you still record it as a sickness absence. You know, if somebody's not able to come to work, then they're not able to come to work. Certainly wouldn't encourage them to come to work if they're feeling unwell. But you could maybe record it as an authorised absence, just so that it doesn't affect any other sort of sickness absence record that they've got. Just because we are in, hate to use the word again, but unprecedented times, I think, you know, like I say, to penalise people for this when, you know, they're doing something for the greater good and to help make sure everything is secure and safe in the workplace. I think managing that as a part of their normal absence could be quite damaging and could probably send out the wrong message. So like I say, I would still, you know, mark it down as an absence, but maybe consider having it as an authorised absence.
Okay, perfect. I think that's all the questions we kind of had from a HR side of things. So I think at this point we might move on to the health and safety side. I'm sure Colin will be able to elaborate on some of the points that Lawrence raised as well in terms of like managing the return. So if we just get stuck into the questions that we've got with regards to health and safety, I'd just like to remind people though, if you do have any questions or queries that you would like answered by either Lauren or Colin, please drop them in the chat and we'll be happy to kind of run through those at the end after Colin's kind of run through the questions that we already have here. So like I said at the start, Colin has joined us recently to take on the role of health and safety consultant, and we're kind of very excited for Colin to kind of get stuck in, start being able to visit people on site when the world allows that once again. So Colin, the first question I've got for yourself is that, so someone's asked, so my business has an appointed health and safety officer. Is that enough, or do we need any additional health and safety resource or checks at these times?
Well, essentially, the answer is yes, that is enough. However, what you've got to bear in mind, and a lot of organisations do this, that they pin the responsibility of health and safety on one of the managers, and so it's in addition to whatever they're doing. The key thing is here for health and safety is that the person who's responsible for health and safety has competency in being able to deliver the health and safety in terms of making sure the business is compliant. So it's not just tagged on to another manager to just, you know, if you like, muddle through. Yeah, there is a responsibility. Every organisation has to have it. Regulation 7 states that they have to have access to a competent person. So businesses themselves, depending on the size and depending on the structure and the type of business they are, yes, they do have to have a competent person, and having a health and safety officer in-house is a very good move, but it's ensuring that they've got a level of competency and able to access up-to-date information when it is needed.
Excellent. So the next question we have is, how would we know that we are COVID safe? So now, but then also when people return from furlough, so what steps should we be taking as a business to ensure that we are COVID safe for employees who are working at home, but then also when people start to return to the physical workplace as well?
Yeah, there's two aspects to this really. The fact that you've alluded to people who are working from home, but also those who are on furlough who might then be returning to the workplace. If your workplace is currently open, it should already be deemed COVID safe. So therefore, you've got all the right position. You know, you've got everything in place in terms of you've carried out a risk assessment in your workplace. You've managed, or you're able to put in place some kind of social distancing measures, whatever that might be. It could be might be reorganizing your office space or your workspace to make sure that there's limited numbers in certain areas. You might want to control people going into more communal areas like kitchen areas, staff rooms. So again, it's limiting that, staggering lunch breaks, etc., or breaks as it might be. Obviously, there needs to be a cleaning station, some hygiene. You have to consider the ventilation in your workplace and the air conditioning within that as well. And leading on to what Lauren was saying about people who are also working from home, even if they are working from home, you should have carried out some kind of check or assessment of their workplace because they are working from home. Just because they are working from home, it doesn't diminish your responsibility as an employer for their health and safety. So you need to make sure that measures are in place and systems are in place in order then to make sure that they've got a workstation which is ergonomically sound for them to carry out their work. That that they're not just sitting on their laps and on the sofa with their feet up for any prolonged period of time. The issue of slip, trip, and fall raises a question because it's something you can control in the workplace. But you can't control in people's home environment. But so you need to make sure that you are taking all the steps necessary to make sure those who are working from home are doing so as safely as if it was in work, basically. And going back to the people who are on furlough, yeah, again, it's that reassurance, as Lauren was saying, about making sure that they are communicated with. They are aware of the risk assessments. They are aware of the new measures that are in place in terms of social distancing. It might be a change of working practices. It might well be that the workstation is changed completely. So again, you need to put everything you can in place to do that. You may also want to think about vulnerable workers. So you might have people who are, shall we say, through COVID, who have been at risk. Because of they might have had underlying health issues. So you might need to take extra steps to make sure that their safety and their health and their well-being is being catered for as well through this transition. 12th of April is coming. It's not far away now, and that's when most other businesses are going to start to open up. And I think, as a caveat, I think what we need to do is make sure as employers is to make sure that we're not taking the foot off the pedal in terms of making sure the health and safety in terms of COVID is maintained or isn't maintained even, because I think what we don't want to be seeing and what we don't want to happen is for us all to take a step back on this, and end up back in a lockdown and in a furlough situation and everything else like that. So making sure you've taken all the measures, making sure you've all the steps you've taken is key. I would suggest, because it's ever evolving and ever changing, and the government changed the guidelines and changed their approach on this as we ease out of lockdown. My suggestion would be is to constantly look at the HSE website or the government website to see what is current in terms of what is the new COVID safe guidelines.
Perfect. You mentioned the HSE there, and we have a few questions in relation to that, but we've had a question pop up in the chat that I might maybe worth asking first, just because in relation to kind of what you've just been talking about the workplace.
Okay.
So Karim has asked, do you think businesses will need to consider having their IT devices professionally disinfected as part of their COVID-19 risk assessment? Is there going to be this need, or what are your thoughts?
I think it's the approach that you've got to take, and you've got to look at it from a practical point of view. If you have provided IT equipment and people have been using it from home, then you might want to consider that if it's been a prolonged period of time, and if that person or that person's at home has been exposed to COVID and things like that. I think you just need to take a very practical approach to it. But obviously, ultimately, yes, it would make sense to actually sanitize everything that's coming back into the office, even if it is just that person using it, or it might be a piece of equipment that is going to be shared by somebody else. Then yes, most definitely that needs to be cleansed and sanitized before it can be used by a multitude of people.
Excellent, thanks, Colin. So you mentioned the HSE when you run through kind of the last question. So one of the questions I've had submitted is, could the HSE do a spot check on our business to ensure that we are COVID safe?
Simple answer is yes, and they are already doing so. They are working quite rigorously at the moment with local authorities, and they've employed additional agents to help them with their normal inspectors going out to businesses who are already operating. They have focused initially on those industries which are deemed as higher risk, IT workers and such like, to make sure that they're maintaining COVID safe status. But they are widening that out now to other industries. I think the last count that I looked at, the HSE have actually conducted over 165,000 spot checks up and down the country already. They've reported that majority of businesses in the main are compliant. However, there have been a number of cases where they've had to consider enforcement notices or give them some kind of guidance as to ensure that the business then is COVID safe. And they take that approach basically on everything they do.
Are there any particular areas where it seems like businesses have fallen short in terms of where they're not meeting that compliance? Is there kind of common pitfalls that a lot of businesses who aren't?
The main challenge has been maintaining social distancing. That has been the main challenge. It's all well and good putting sticky tape on the carpet and saying don't go past this point, but it's actually maintaining that, and especially when you're in the throes of working, and if you are working traditionally in close proximity, you've got to look at that carefully in terms of how you are going to maintain that social distancing, whether you can adopt a one-way system, for instance, within the workplace, whether you can spread workstations to a wider degree. All of these type of things you need to factor in. So. Okay,
excellent. I've had another question in the chat for yourself, Colin, but Lauren, you may also be able to weigh in on this as well from a HR perspective. But so what we've been asked is I think a lot of people potentially may be scared to ask their employers to provide them with the right ergonomic setup if they're working from home. But where are the responsibilities held if something goes wrong? So if the employee isn't speaking up, do you think employees need to speak up if they're not working comfortably from home?
Do you want me to take that first, Lauren? Oh, you're on mute.
Let me just unmute Lauren for 1 moment.
Well, from the ergonomic point of view, quite simply, from a health and safety point of view, and the DSE regs state that there has to be an assessment for anybody's workstation. So ergonomically, yes, you've got a responsibility to do that. And if you as an employer haven't, then the employee is well within their rights to raise that as an issue. And you have to take every steps necessary. Obviously, as an employer, you have to do everything that is practicable in order to make sure that they are able to work safely and consider their health. And like any risk, you have to weigh that up against cost, time, and resource against the actual risk itself. But the fact that an employee is maybe questioning the ergonomics of working from home, then you as an employer have a duty to make sure that you're taking every step practicable to overcome that and minimize that.
Yeah, we had this query come in this week as well from another organisation, because they had employees starting to ask whether they should be provided with that equipment. And I think the key distinction is whether you are insisting that they work from home or whether you're giving them the option. So if you're insisting that they work from home, then you may need to provide that equipment for them. However, if you're just giving them the option and they're choosing to work from home, then you would probably just need to follow the steps that Colin has outlined in terms of making sure that you've done those assessments. But arguably the responsibility wouldn't be on you to provide that equipment if they're asking that they can work from home, if that makes sense. It just needs to, you just need to make sure that your duties as an employer, as Colin has outlined, are taken care of.
Excellent. Thanks, Lauren. Colin, you touched before on the HSE providing businesses with an enforcement notice. Can you just go into a bit more detail in terms of what this actually is?
Sorry, say that again. Sorry.
So basically, so you were speaking about enforcement notices from the HSE. So can you just elaborate on what an enforcement notice is?
Yeah, enforcement notices. If an inspector does come into your workplace, they have the power to impose enforcement notices for any breach of regulation from health and safety. Not just because of COVID, but COVID is obviously playing a part of that now. Just to bear in mind, they are doing COVID safe checks, but they're doing that in line with doing other inspections as well. So they're not just going to look at COVID in isolation. They're going to look at your organisation from a wider health and safety perspective. The enforcement notices themselves could be, depending on the severity of it, could be a simple verbal warning where they will just say, look, I'm not happy about this. Just to bear this in mind, you need to make these changes and you need to make them quite quickly, but they'll go away and expect you to do it. If it's a little bit more severe, they might what they call is impose an improvement notice, whereby they will give you an agreed period of time to make those improvements, whereby they will come back and reassess that those improvements have been made. For more severe ones, they may impose a prohibition notice, which would insist and ensure that you cease that activity or that work practice, and they will put remedial action in place for you to make sure that you do follow that through, and they will come back and reassess and ensure that yes, your new practices and your new measures that you put in place will then lift that prohibition notice. Obviously, on the more serious and the most serious, they can take immediate action if they choose to, and if they wish to, and they can impose and actually prosecute if it is a serious breach of health and safety. And that will impose that being imposed could mean fines and or imprisonment or both. So that's the severity of it if it's deemed serious enough. But by and large, I would say that most organizations, there are always going to be gaps because you can't cover everything, but I would say that most HSE inspections, the enforcement notices are generally, only issued on the more serious and the more immediate threat, if you like, of safety.
Perfect. We had one more question, not pre-prepared, but I think you've answered that already. It was just kind of asking what the fines and potential ramifications would be for a business that wasn't COVID secure. I think
well, on the COVID secure side, yeah, they might just improve an improvement notice. But if there are breaches of health and safety regulation, it's worth bearing in mind that the HSE inspector will impose, and if you are going to be prosecuted, your prosecution and or prison. This sounds bleak, but I don't wish to sound bleak. But if it is a fine and imprisonment, it's for each and every regulation or every breach of regulation. So it's upended in terms of what that fine could be, because it is dependent on the severity of the breach, as would be the imprisonment. But let's say, for argument's sake, the HSE say, okay, you're in breach of 10 regulations within the workplace, and each one is going to give you a £5,000 fine and a 6 months prison sentence. That's what you're looking at basically. It's for each requisite breach of regulation that you've got to consider. But I'd say that's looking at it very bleak, but it doesn't happen very often, thankfully. Right.
Perfect. Thanks, Colin. We've got a few more questions in chat. I'd urge anyone else that does have a question to ask them now, just so we can have either Lauren or Colin pick those up for you. So the first one that we have is from Lee. So I'm guessing this would be for yourself, Colin, or potentially you might want to touch on this as well, Lauren. But it's basically asking, can we ask our employees to take peak flow tests as and when they require? So I'm guessing similar to how we may take our temperature in the office when we come over in the morning. Is that something that they can also ask of employees?
From a COVID safe point of view, yeah, temperatures. But in terms of testing, you need to get guidelines. You need to get guidance on
Yeah, I think this came up recently because obviously the things with the taking the temperature and everything and signing in and the hand sanitizing, that's obviously as part of your obligation to keep everybody safe. But there was a bit of an argument that came up a couple of months ago where I had an employer who had somebody test positive for COVID. They had done the isolation period, and the employer was insisting that they took another test before they came back in. So I just ran this by our legal team, who said, well, technically they have followed all the guidance, and the guidance doesn't say that you need to take another test after the isolation period. So to insist that that person done that before they returned would potentially be a bit difficult. So again, I think I'd just focus on, as Colin had said, what's sort of necessary. You know, if you think that people need to take a flow test, it would typically only be if they were displaying symptoms, I guess. So yeah, I can certainly have a look into that in terms of some other guidance, but for now I'd say that you wouldn't be able to insist that those employees take those tests. But again, I'll have a look into that and come back to you, and we'll make sure that we get something out. In terms of the policy, I can see that you've asked a question about a policy, Lee. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So if you've got those measures in place, those COVID safe measures, it's just the same as your normal health and safety policy, I guess. They would be expected to adhere to that. So it may be sensible that you outline that in a separate policy, which obviously will be unique to every business. And you know, you may have a one-way system in place, you may have an office rota in place, so you just maybe make that clear in a document to staff, and obviously you would then be able to rely on that if you did need to insist on any disciplinary action if an employee was simply failing to follow, which I guess going back to Colin's comments about the inspections, it's actually really important that your employees are aware of those procedures and what they should be following, because ultimately if you were to get a drop-in inspection and somebody isn't doing something right, I'm assuming that would get you in a bit of trouble with the HSE.
Perfect. Thanks, Lauren. A question from Corinne, who's asking to just be unmuted. Just ask the question to both yourself and Colin, Lauren. So I'm just going to unmute him for a moment so you can ask the question, if that's okay.
Hi, Colin. Hi, Lauren. Hiya.
Hi.
Hiya. My name is Karim. I'm the Managing Director of Wellbeing and Ergonomics, and I'm the one who's asking all these safety questions actually, because I've seen absolute disaster, you know, especially when people working from home, they're using the ironing boards or shoebox and all these kind of things to create an ergonomic setup. But ergonomics is completely different. You know, it could be running a disaster for getting like the long-term injury. So we've been helping a lot of people setting up, but I think this is the question when I asked Daniel to ask you guys, it's like employees are not speaking up and just saying, right, we are suffering actually by not having the right setup. And that's what I was asking Colin, like where the responsibility lies, you know, if something goes wrong. The another thing is coming from tomorrow, which is something called super detection actually, which is HMRC. Well, it was coming up in the budget in March budget that employers now can claim for capital allowance for 130% to buy any chairs and desks actually for the employees. And not many people know about it because HMRC, they just put it against plant and machinery, and not many people know within the plant and machinery is the chairs and desk and office equipment is a part of the super deduction, which gives benefit on the corporation tax. So I think this will be great to take this message, Colin and Lauren, to your clients and just tell them like this can be done now.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Corinne. That's
Thanks, Corinne.
useful information. That. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, great. I think we may have another question in the chat. I'll just check one moment. Okay. So there we go. Where's that gone? So Lee has asked. I think this is just to follow on from your response before, Laura. Just so would that policy include outside of work actions? So people's kind of responsibility to adhere to that policy, you know, does that include outside of work?
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting because I had initially, I had a similar query a while back from a client who is a nursery. They were obviously able to stay open during the lockdown for key workers' children. And what had happened is a student's mum had reported to the school that they'd seen a nursery worker not adhering to social distancing and mixing with people from other households. So my initial thoughts were, well, it's outside of work. Can that, can they be held responsible for that, because employees are entitled to a private life? But when I ran this by our legal team, they actually confirmed that the employee has the responsibility to protect the health and safety of the colleague. So you have to act in a way that is responsible, and that you are entering the workplace not knowingly putting other people at risk. So obviously, if you aren't adhering to social distancing and the COVID guidelines outside of work, you are then knowingly going into a workplace where you're putting potentially customers and colleagues at risk, then it is something that your employer can hold you accountable to. So the only thing you would need with that is to basically put your employees on a bit of notice that you would deal with that. So you'd basically need to say, we've had an incident where we've been made aware that somebody isn't adhering to social guidelines, and we need to make it clear to you now that everybody, every employee outside of work is expected to take responsibility for their own safety, because it, in regards to COVID, it directly impacts your other colleagues if you return to work, and this will be dealt with. Any breaches of this will be dealt with under the Disciplinary Act. So you just basically need to put your staff on notice that you've became aware of something and it would be dealt with in the disciplinary procedure. Just because, like I say, with COVID, if you are mixing with people, you are knowingly putting your colleagues at risk when you do return.
Can I just continue that question? So does that matter whether that's from like a witness? So whether that be a client or someone, does it matter whether they're in uniform or not? And does that also include like social media posts? So if somebody's like sending out posts saying, "Hey, we're having a party," and I have a lot of young staff, and I used to be daft and stupid as well, but we have to be exceptionally careful now, and we've got risk assessments in place, and we're doing everything that we can possibly do. But if those people are pushing the boundaries, and we find out about it, I take it we can then say, well, because of this, can you please explain your actions? Yeah, as long as you just go back to my previous point, Lee, as long as employees are aware that you would deal with that with disciplinary, so it may be wise that you send a bit of a notification out to say. So we could redo that. We could do a policy during this time that during this pandemic, if any one of our team members are seen to be flouting the lockdown rules or suggestions, it could potentially lead to an investigation or disciplinary matters. Yeah, because if it's putting the staff at risk, so obviously the risk is probably significantly reduced now with the introduction of the vaccine and lockdown measures are easing. So you'd need to sort of weigh up the risk, if that makes sense. So this what I was talking about happened about maybe 6 months ago, and the children were still in the nursery at the time, so it was really relevant that people were absolutely putting people at risk by not adhering to them. So yeah, if somebody is breaking the rules and you can see, say on social media, that, I don't know, they attended a huge gathering, and you're concerned that they're putting the staff at risk when they return, then yeah, absolutely. Fabulous, thank you. Okay.
Daniel must be reading questions.
Is he reading or is he frozen?
I don't know.
Is he frozen? Oh, yeah. He's gone.
He's gone completely.
Has anybody else got any questions that they feel we haven't answered or you'd like to know more about? No. I just wanted to add as well on my previous point about returning. Oh, I can see Helen has raised hand. Sorry, Helen, I'm not sure how to navigate this. I think I'm now the host. Oh, is Helen gone? Oh no, there. I'll unmute you for a second, Helen.
Hi guys, you've been so helpful and so informative. This is really, really amazing stuff. Thank you for putting this on, first of all. One thing that I would like to double check with you, we have started opening our office, and a few weeks back we made sure everything was COVID secure. We're all socially distanced, we're doing everything we possibly can, and we are adhering to government guidelines. However, one of our employees kind of had a bit of a meltdown as soon as she stepped into the office. She was obviously very, very anxious about coming back out into the real world, which is absolutely fine. So what we did was we put in place, we kept her working from home on the grounds of mental health grounds. And I've been doing 2 weekly Zoom calls with her as wellbeing calls, just to support her through that, which can sometimes be at anything from like 15 to 30 minutes, but at least she's having some sort of interaction with someone from the business. She now wants to come back, and I want to be able to support her to come back in a really supportive and positive manner. However, I want to make sure that I'm doing this in the right way. Have you got any advice or guidance on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, it's amazing that you've been so supportive, Helen, and that you've recognized that people are anxious. And, you know, I stress that again. I've got, you know, a lot of clients who are having the same issues, of people who are just generally nervous to come out, you know, especially if you've had people either on furlough who, you know, haven't seen a workplace or even been near work for up to a year, or anybody who's been shielded, or who may have family who are shielded. And obviously everybody's going to have their own individual and unique anxieties about returning to work. So I think firstly what you've done there, Helen, is absolutely brilliant in terms of having them welfare check-ins from a mental health perspective. I think secondly, I would say conduct return to work interviews if possible. So I would treat it the same way you would a long-term absence. You know, people being out of the business, whether on furlough or just working from home for up to a year, will impact people potentially in the same way that a long-term absence would. It's going to cause that anxiety, same way it would with people returning from maternity leave, perhaps. So I think return to work interviews are a great way to do that, and also maybe consider phased returns. So I know that's something that HPC have done, and we have managed the return to work on a gradual basis. So you could maybe suggest that you put your staff on a rota, which will obviously help with the social distancing too, but also ease people back in. So if people are maybe starting to come back for 1 day a week, and then 2 days a week, and then 3, and then 4, and gradually sort of working that up, I think that's probably an ideal approach to take to ease people back in and hopefully allay those fears. I think, you know, I could probably speak for most people. We were all probably a little bit anxious about coming back to the office or a workplace. But once you're in there, you know, it's absolutely fine. And a lot of people probably feel that it's better for the mental health. But yeah, I think maybe just easing them in and giving people the opportunity to just have 1 day a week to get used to things, and then revert and gradually build it up if that's possible.
Perfect. I don't think we have any more questions in the chat. If anyone does have a question, if you want to pop them in now for either Colin or Lauren, that would be great. Apologies, I don't know, I lost my connection for a minute back there and just dipped out of the meeting, so I'm sure I missed out on a lot of insightful knowledge from both Lauren and Colin. Just to see, I don't think we've had anything additional come through. So I don't know if that's a good place to leave it there, potentially. I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. Would welcome people to join our peopleHUB community on LinkedIn. We do provide kind of regular update articles and content on there. We're also open to people's kind of ideas for what we should, what the subject of our next webinar should be. So we can kind of bring a member of our employment law team, HR team, or health and safety to kind of answer your questions or concerns about that particular topic. In addition, we were happy to have Colin on the session today. Colin is currently offering health and safety health checks for all businesses. They are free. They're free. They're up to the value of £350, but they'll be free to any member of the peopleHUB community or anyone who's attended the webinar today. So if you want to make contact with Colin direct, he can kind of get that booked in, and he can share his vast health and safety knowledge with you, so you're not getting caught up with any of those fines or going to prison like you mentioned earlier. Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks everyone for joining today, and if you do have any questions after the session, feel free to get in touch, and either Lauren, Colin or myself can follow up and answer any of those questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.